Hi traders, welcome to this video. Today I want to talk about an ongoing trade from me, and this is ROKU. I will show you where I entered ROKU. I will show you where I add and decrease my ongoing position. And of course I want to show you the research part and why I bought ROKU. And in the last section we will look at the live chart from ROKU, and I will give you some or I want to tell you some thoughts about the ongoing price action in ROKU. So but before we start, please take a few seconds to read this risk disclaimer. So this video is only for educational purposes. It is no investment advice. You are responsible for your own decisions and for your own investment and trading decisions. Okay, so let's start. The entry of my ROKU trade. So as you know, I'm mostly starting with a weekly chart when I look at stocks. And this was also the case with ROKU, and you can see when I decided to trade ROKU or to buy a position in ROKU, I looked at the weekly chart. I had the stock on my watch list already for some weeks, and you can see that ROKU created a very nice consolidation for about a little bit more than 1 year. So 1 year the price was going sideways, and we had this very nice shakeout situation here during the market correction here. So a lot of buyers were shaken out of their positions, and this is always something where, or what I call reset of the clock. So it is a reset in the stock, and only the strong hands or institutions stay in the stock. Maybe they reduce their positions, but they stay in a core position. And when the situation in ROKU and also in the chart turns around, they will add again to the position, and maybe also new funds and new institutions are buying ROKU after such a shakeout here. And and you can see when the price approached the all-time high, this is a situation where I get interested in ROKU. I'm not interested to buy a stock when it's going sideways for weeks or months. I'm interested when a new trend is created. So when the stock comes into new highs ground, and when there is no overhead resistance. And that is the case here with ROKU. And it's also a very young stock. And you know from my videos where I talk about the typical cycle of a company, or the typical growth cycle of a company, you can see that also the young companies are the companies with the highest growth and the strongest performance. And this is the case with ROKU. And you can see ROKU was growing extremely fast in sales in the last quarters. So 40%, 55%, 50%, 50%, etc. So very strong growth. And I also saw that the number of funds, so the number or the funds who owning position in ROKU, grew over the last quarters. From 600 to 800. So the interest in ROKU is also increasing. And also we see only 100 million shares. This is, in my opinion, very low float for such a big market cap, for 22 billion market cap. Yes, and another important thing I look at is the volume, and you can see all this skyscraper volumes, or this extreme high volume bars over the average volume line here, over this red line. And these are all blue bars, and blue bars means that was a week where the price was increasing. And this shows me that there is interest in the stock, and accumulation is ongoing, and if you see such big bars or such big volume skyscrapers, this is always a sign of institutional interest, because they are only able to produce such big increases in volume. We will come to the research part a little bit later, but you can see I'm looking for big bases here. I'm looking for increasing relative strength and growth, and of course volume. That is a very nice combination when you look for strong stocks. If we come now to the daily chart, you can see this big consolidation here, and then you can see that I made a note here, RS line high before price. This is something I'm always looking for, especially when you see that the market is in a correction, and that was the case here. You can see this black line here. This is the S&P 500. You can see the market was in a correction, and ROKU was very close here to new all-time highs, and this is really relative strength. So the stock and the price action is very strong in relation or in comparison to the general market. And this shows me that people are not selling ROKU. They hold their positions or they buy new positions. Yes, and you can see also here this blue bars or skyscraper volumes also in the daily chart, which is another good sign for me. And when I'm looking to buy a position, I always look for consolidations before I enter the position. And that was also the case here. You can see the stock was going sideways here for some days or some weeks, and then you see one extreme update here, 13%, 600% volume increase on that day, or estimated volume increase at that day. And that was a sign for me to buy into the position and to create a first test position, so 10% of my capital in ROKU. Just one word to the negative EPS here, and also to the negative quarterly EPS. This is not a surprise, or this is not so important for me, because this is a very young company and they reinvest all the profits into the growth, and you can see that in the sales numbers. And in such a situation, I look much more for sales growth and not so for EPS growth. That was the day when I entered ROKU here, and that was after close, so you can see the volume closed at 300% above the moving average here, which is a very, very strong sign of interest in the stock. Okay, some further observations. So I regularly take screenshots from my trades, and I want to show you some further observations. And the first thing I noted was, after the entry, the stock approached the $200 mark here, which is a round number, and you can see that it created this channel. So if you take a trend line from this high around the 170 and 185, and then you can see that the price was rejected at this line and also at this $200 mark. But that was, or I expected that, because the market was very weak at this situation. You can see the S&P 500 here, and you can see it was it was down or sideways, and that's always a difficult situation when a stock tries to break out, but the market is still weak. You can always expect some volatility in the stock, and that was what the case here. And I made the note here, I expected that. So that was not a great sign here, because the price was rejected, and there's always the danger that the price will drop again to the moving averages or go sideways here. And in that situation, I start to observe the stock more closely, to maybe get out as soon as possible when the price drops. And it was also on higher volume, which is another bad sign because there was a lot of negative volume at that day. Then you can see I made another screenshot a few days later here, and you can see that the situation here was not so negative. So you saw another correction day, and then this price started to move up, and you can see in the S&P 500 line that also the S&P 500 changed the direction, and that was the wind on the back of the stock, so that ROKU was also able to break out to the upside here. And I made the note here exhaustion because there was this up gap here, and I don't think so because the trend is very young, or was very young at that time. And I also made a note here, very strong stock, so because it was definitely outperforming the S&P 500 at that time. That was another situation, super strong. I made the note here. You can see the S&P 500 was going sideways, and also ROKU was going sideways and was consolidating in a very narrow range. It was going sideways, and the changes from day to day were very, very small. And that is a great sign because there is not so much selling in the stock. And you can see that the volume dropped extremely, or dried up extremely. And that was another good sign, because if a stock is going sideways, you always want to see some decrease in volume, which gives you the hint that there is not so much selling in the stock. Okay, so now we come to the part where I added to the position, or where I traded around the core position. The core position, or my core position, is always between 10 and 15%. I made this small graphic here to show you where I entered and added and sold. And you saw that some slides ago. I entered the stock here on this monster bar here when the stock broke above this small high here, and I added to the stock when after this consolidation here. So because in that situation the stock showed me that it was able to overcome this weakness here and approach new highs, and that always gives me the conviction or the confidence to add to the position again. And I also added here on this very strong bar. That was a high, so you never know that before, but that was a high, and I added to it because it shows me again that the stock was so strong. And when I buy into the position here at the entry, when I buy a first test position, it's always 10%. Then I add 50% of the initial position. That means in that case here, when I added the first time, I own 15%. And in that time here, I added only 50% of this previous add here. And in that case, it's 17.5%. So in that situation here, I owned 17.5% of ROKU. That's a normal, that's how I handle that and add to my position. And then I sold before earnings, because ROKU published earnings here on that day here on this big bar, and I sold before earnings a little bit. I sold 20% of my position, and I did this because I want to reduce the risk. You saw this correction here before, and the price was dropping below the 21 EMA here, and in that case I moved my stop loss closer to the price, and I already had some profit cushion here, so that means in that situation the trade is definitely break even, so my stop loss is at the break even point, but I don't want to lose so much when the stock maybe gap 20% against me on the earnings day. And that's why I reduced the position size a little bit. So sold 20% of my 17.5% position. And on that day, when the reaction to earning was very, very positive, I added back to it. So that means I added back to this 17.5% level. So that 17.5% of my capital is in Roku. And in that case, I bought more. So I had, I think it was around 22% or something in Roku. So I bought a little bit more, and of course my average entry price increased. But in that situation, I have a very nice low here where I can place my stop loss. And and in that case, I have a larger position in Roku. That was a day when Roku had earnings. So very nice earnings here. We will come to that in the research part. But in that situation, I added back to my stock. Then in the next day after earnings, Roku gapped down, and it gapped down heavily, 8, and the volume was also increased here, 77%. But in that case, the gap down hold, and in that case, so I held on to the position here, although we have this weakness in the stock, but I want to monitor the stock, and I want to give the stock enough room so that that it can prove itself and maybe turn into a very strong super winner. So I want to give the stock really room, but on the other side, I monitor it very closely when it starts to pull back more or show more weakness. And that was the case the next day. So Roku went down, and then I also sold 30% of my 22% position. So to be defensive as possible, because in that situation, you can see that the price already dropped below this last high, and that always gives me the situation or the hint that the price needs more time to consolidate. Now we have a new high here over this $250 level. We have a new low on this $200 level, and the price can oscillate or going sideways for weeks now here between 200 and 250. And in that situation, I want to be defensive. And I don't want to have so much capital when a stock is going sideways or do not behave as I expected that. I expected that Roku will follow through after this earnings situation and go higher. But that was not the case. And in that situation, I want to be defensive, and I sold 30% because I can buy back anytime. And I also reduced other positions on that day, so it was a very weak day for growth stocks in general. But you can see that the price held this EMA 21 level here, so a good sign. And maybe I will add to the position again at a later point when the stock will break out to new highs or show another pivot point. But we will come to this later when we look at the live stock. Okay, the research part. I love research, and I love researching growth stocks and disruptive stocks. So this is really my passion. You can see the other videos I made, for example, about Fastly or how to do research with a Beyond Meat example. So, and I want to give you some insights into my research here. And first we start with what I see in Roku. So why I am buying Roku. And this is not because only this chart situation and not only because of fundamentals, but also because of the potential I see. And this is much more important because I want to make sure that the company and the stock is able to surprise after I bought it. So because I want to hold on to the position for weeks or months, And I want to make sure that the business model is working and there is a high demand for that. And Roku is a company engaged in streaming, industry. And you know that streaming is currently changing the whole TV world. So if you look into the future, you can see that streaming will replace the normal TV we are watching currently. And Roku is one of the leading companies in that area. And Roku has a very big advantage in comparison to the other streaming providers like Amazon, Netflix, etc., etc. And they can make money with advertising. And this is very important because if you only have the fees, the subscription fees, like we have with Netflix and Amazon Video, etc., you are very dependent on this subscription fees. And there is a high competition between all these streaming providers and also in this fee model. And Roku is able to make advertising or to use advertising between or in the middle of the streams and between the changes in the streams. So when you maybe switch from one provider to another, or you see advertising on the platform itself. And they have a very high business advantage, and they can personalize the advertising. So they know a lot of you, what you are doing, what your preferences are, and they use all the data to personalize this advertising. And if you look at the current linear TV world, where everyone is seeing the same advertising, this is really disruptive because they can show you a different advertising than, for example, your brother, your sister, or your wife. And this is a big advantage, and they are using this currently. They also have corporations in the USA with, I think, Kroger, and they are using the data from Kroger to personalize the advertising. So they're trying out new ways to present advertising to you. And another big benefit is they have multiple income sources. So they are selling players. This is one side. They are making money with licenses. So they are giving away the Roku OS to other manufacturers of TVs. And they're making money with advertising. And exactly this advertising thing was what surprised me so much about Roku. You know, advertising revenue were down during the COVID-19 situation because a lot of companies cut their marketing budgets. But Roku was up. So that means a lot of other companies switched the marketing budgets from other platforms to Roku. And that surprised me, and that was a hint to look deeper into the Roku stock and also into the research and backgrounds. Another thing I stumbled upon in an interview was this Roku OS advantage, and I find it very interesting because the Roku OS is built in that way that it's also running on low performance TVs. Amazon Video, for example, is using Android as an operating system for their Fire TVs. And they need a lot of power, so CPU power and a lot of RAM to execute their operating system. And Roku is built that way that it's also running on low performance TVs. That means on no-name TVs or on TVs with less interesting brands, for example, and also on all these cheaper TVs. And that gives Roku a big advantage because they can cooperate with a lot of manufacturers from TVs. And that is maybe also an advantage from the Roku platform side. Another thing is they are an independent platform. You know, You know that Amazon, for example, has a lot of problems to cooperate with Google and Apple, and also Netflix is running also on Amazon and also on Apple and Google platforms, but Amazon want to do business by their own, so they are in competition with Netflix, etc. And Roku is really independent because they are not they're not dependent on this fees, and they are not dependent on own content in that way. And they can also integrate Amazon, Netflix, Google, Apple, Disney, etc. without having any politics or any competition between all the streaming providers. And that gives them, from what I see and what I think, a big advantage, because they can provide customers access to all the streaming providers on the platform. Some expansion potentials. This is always interesting. Roku is working on new devices. So they, for example, created a new device, a soundbar. So they're trying out new innovations with new devices which customers can buy. They have definitely the potential to bring own content to the platform. I'm not sure if Roku is interested to produce, for example, own TV series or movies or something, but they can maybe add also some own content which makes a platform more interesting for other users. And they, of course, can expand international. So I think they're currently in the USA, they're in UK and Canada, but there is a lot of other there are a lot of other countries where Roku can expand to, and gain market shares in those in those countries. And another thing I wrote down is Roku is, in my eyes, a possible merger candidate. There were some rumors about that Google will buy Roku or something, but that didn't take place. So it was not. It was a false rumor. I commented that in my newsletters and on Twitter at that time. So, but I think Roku could be a possible merger candidate for companies which want to take part or want to have a share in the streaming world and do not have any hardware and any contacts to streaming providers. And this is, for example, if you look at Microsoft, so they always try to get into the world of streaming and digital services. And they maybe could buy Roku, but also other companies are maybe interested in Roku. Some Google, for example, but they have their own hardware and they are maybe not so interested in that. Apple, for example, could be a better candidate because Apple do not have they have own hardware, but the hardware is very complicated, and I think Roku offers much more interesting hardware when it comes to that. But Apple can build new hardware by their own very quickly, so I'm not sure if they are really interested in that. But maybe also other companies like TV providers or cable providers can buy Roku, because they have a market cap of 22 billion, so this is very cheap and can be acquired or easily bought out by bigger companies. So I see definitely a merger potential in Roku. So we saw that at the beginning, so of course we see a big sales growth here. 73% in the last quarter. That is a very high growth. We looked at that at the beginning of the video, and here is a screenshot I take from the Roku quarterly reports. So I always look at quarterly reports when I do research, and you can see here that in the Q2 they have exceptional account growth. They have the largest net increase in active accounts, so one record after one record, and they grew with 42% here. The platform revenue increased also and the gross profit was up. So very good numbers here, and also the average revenue per user, which is a very important currency in the streaming world or generally in the digital service world, was also up 18%. That means customers are buying more and giving, or spending more money on the Roku platform itself. Here another 3 screenshots, and I already talked about that a lot. You can see that here, for example, monetized video ad impressions grew roughly 50%, and that was in the COVID situation. So that was, monster growth. And you can see here also a newer category catering to direct response advertisers grew 346% year over year. So that shows you that there is a lot of growth also in this advertising products from Roku, and they have a new OneView ad platform. So they are trying out new products, bringing new products to the market, and with that it's much more easier to target and measure advertising, and also interesting. And you can see here, I already talked about that they're also expanding into the international world. Canada, UK, more than doubled year over year. So another growth opportunity worldwide. Then the Q3 numbers were much better. So they grew 73% year over year. The platform revenue was up 78%. The gross profit was up 81%. So monster numbers. And again, the RPU, or average revenue per user, was also up 20%. And monster numbers for such a company. So 70% revenue growth is definitely large numbers, and show you that there is a demand for the products. People want this Roku products, and with Roku products, I don't mean the stick. I also mean advertising. So this platform is getting more interesting for advertisers. Okay, so now we will look at the live chart. Just one word or one final word to the research part. Of course, I'm doing a lot of research, but I always can be on the wrong side. The research gives me confidence to put enough money into Roku and to hold on to the stock. But I can be wrong. And I can spend hours and hours in research, but I can be wrong, absolutely. And in that case, of course, I have my risk management principles and my rules to get out of the stock, independently from what the research is saying me. So when it's time to sell, I sell. I don't ask any questions. Okay, let's look at the live chart from Roku. So I switched to the Trading View platform here, and you can see on the left side is the weekly chart, which is much more important for me. On the right side is the daily chart, and you can see the chart is going sideways, or the price is going sideways. Here, that was the up gap here, or the big bar after earnings. Then we saw this correction here and retest of this EMA 21, where I sold around here 30% of my position. And now I'm observing the price, because you can see that we now have a range here, a range between this high and this low. And I always expect that the price is going sideways here, and I only want to add to my position when the stock is going or breaking out to new highs and shows me that there is enough demand and enough strength to go up again. So, and yeah, when I look now at Roku here, I always expect, or I always observe this high here, and I always observe this low and the EMA 21, because I want to see that now that holds. And when the price drops below the EMA 21 here, I will sell more, or if the price drops below this low here, I will definitely sell the biggest part of my position, or I will be out completely and wait for a new setup. So it can go sideways for weeks. What I now observe is the weekly chart. This always is much more important for me, because if you look at this year, you can see a lot of choppiness, so a lot of volatility going sideways. But this is not shown in the weekly chart. In the weekly chart, I look at that here. This is a big outside bar, or a big bar, which gives me confidence, because you can see that the stock was able to rally again from this EMA 13 line here in the weekly chart and closed at the high. And then, of course, we saw this gap down here. But if I look at the weekly chart, this gives me a much better picture of what's going on in the stock. So, and now you can see that here is the same. So this is now the range, and the stock can go sideways here for another few weeks before it's breaking out. And that gives me the opportunity to add to my position here when it's breaking out, or to sell the position when it's going down. So weekly charts are always much more important for me than daily charts. So I always try to hold my positions as long as possible, and I try to hold my positions until Friday, when I see the close in the weekly chart, when I have profit cushion in the stock. And that is the case currently with ROKU, and I give it some room to prove itself, because if you look at the chart here, it's on a new all-time high. It can easily run higher from here, from this big break out here. It can easily go higher in the next months, and reach new price levels here. And that's why I'm always looking more on a weekly chart here. So to sum it up, I showed you the entry, I showed you where I add and sold a little bit on my core position. I show you the research part, and now we looked at the live chart. And again, for me, the most important parts here is the EMA 21 and the low here. I more expect that the stock is going sideways here in the next days or weeks. But maybe we will get a surprise by news or whatever, and then the stock will run again, or maybe also get down, and then I'm out. That's not a big problem for me. I don't fall in love with a stock. I'm only interested when the price is going up. Okay, I hope that this video helped you to understand much more about what I'm looking for in stocks and how I'm doing research in stocks. If you want to follow me, you can do this here on YouTube. So if you like this video, give it a thumb up. If you have questions, write a comment or write an email to me. You can follow me, of course, on other platforms like Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. But I personally recommend to subscribe to my free newsletter. So I send out a free newsletter every Sunday with trading tips and 3 candidates from my personal watch list. And if you subscribe to my free newsletter, you get a free ebook from me about 25 lessons or 25 personal lessons about the stock market.